They stripped the mansion bare before his body was even cold. They laughed at her silence, calling her weak, calling her a doormat. For 3 years, Evelyn watched her step-siblings loot the family empire, convinced they had won. But they didn't know their father. The billionaire tycoon Silas Vance had left one final secret instruction, a test hidden in plain sight. When Judge Harrison finally opened the sealed red envelope in a crowded courtroom, the laughter stopped instantly. This isn't just a story about inheritance. It's about the brutal price of greed and the deafening power of silence. Listen closely, because what happened in that courtroom changed history. The rain at the funeral felt less like mourning and more like a theatrical effect paid for by the Vance estate. It was a heavy, cold downpour that turned the manicured grass of the chaotic cemetery in Greenwich, Connecticut, into a slip and slide of mud. Evelyn Vance stood at the edge of the grave, her boots sinking slightly into the earth. She wore a simple black wool coat that had seen better days, her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun. She wasn't crying. She had done her crying months ago in the sterile silence of the ICU at Mount Sinai, holding her father's hand while the machines beeped the rhythm of his fading life. To her left stood the Vance Trinity, as the tabloids called them. First was Julian, the eldest. At 45, he was a man who wore Italian suits that cost more than Evelyn's car. He was checking his watch, a Patek Philippe that had belonged to their father until yesterday, when Julian had simply taken it off the nightstand. Next was Lydia, the middle child. She was currently whispering furiously into a phone hidden behind a massive black umbrella. "No, I said list the Hamptons house today. I don't care if probate hasn't cleared. Get the listing agent on the phone, Michael. We need liquidity." And finally, Marcus, the youngest of the Trinity and the most reckless. He was hungover, swaying slightly, his eyes hidden behind dark aviators. He looked bored. Evelyn was the anomaly, the product of Silas Vance's second marriage to a woman the Trinity despised. When Evelyn's mother died 10 years ago, and now Silas, she was effectively alone. She was the half-sister, the help, the one who had moved back into the sprawling Blackwood Manor to change Silas's IV bags and read to him while Julian, Lydia, and Marcus were busy skiing in Aspen or closing deals in Dubai. "Can we wrap this up?" Julian muttered, loud enough for the priest to hear. "I have a board meeting at 4. "He was your father, Julian," Evelyn said softly. It was the first time she had spoken all day. Julian turned, looking at her as if a piece of furniture had suddenly started talking. "He was a corpse for the last 6 months, Evelyn. Let's not pretend he was Father of the Year. And don't lecture me. You're just worried about where you're going to live now that the free ride is over." Lydia snapped her phone shut and smirked. "Oh, don't worry, sweetie. We'll give you a week to pack. Maybe 2, if you help the cleaners organize the attic." Evelyn said nothing. She looked back at the mahogany casket being lowered into the ground. She remembered the last night Silas was lucid. He had gripped her hand with surprising strength. "They will come for the flesh, Evie," he had wheezed, his voice rattling in his chest. "Let them eat. You just watch. Promise me you'll say nothing, no matter what they take. Promise." "I promise, Dad," she had whispered. She intended to keep that promise. Even as the vultures began to circle, the invasion began at 8 a.m., the morning after the funeral. Evelyn was in the kitchen of Blackwood Manor, brewing coffee in the old French press Silas had loved. The house was a museum of memories, massive oil paintings of ancestors, Persian rugs worn thin by decades of footsteps, and shelves lined with first editions. It was warm, cluttered, and lived in. Then the front doors were thrown open. Julian walked in first, followed by a team of 3 appraisers holding clipboards and tablets. Lydia followed, trailed by an interior designer named Stefan, who was already wrinkling his nose at the wallpaper. "Everything goes," Julian announced, not even acknowledging Evelyn standing by the stove. "We need a full inventory by noon. Furniture, art, jewelry, the silver collection. If it's worth more than $500, tag it." "What are you doing?" Evelyn asked, gripping her coffee mug. Lydia breezed past her, picking up a crystal vase from the hallway table and checking the bottom for a maker's mark. "Liquidation, darling. Estate taxes are going to be murder. We're selling the contents of the house at auction next month. Sotheby's is already interested in the art collection." "But the will hasn't been read yet," Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Sterling said the reading is in 2 weeks. You can't just sell everything." Marcus walked in, eating an apple he had grabbed from the fruit bowl. "We're the executors, Evie. Majority rules. 3 against 1. And technically, since you were never formally adopted by the Vance Trust, you're not even a voting member. So, hush." He took a bite of the apple and dropped the core on the floor. Evelyn watched as the appraisers moved through the house like a swarm of locusts. They slapped neon yellow stickers on everything. Yellow sticker on the grandfather clock in the foyer. Yellow sticker on the Steinway piano Evelyn had learned to play on. Yellow sticker on Silas's favorite leather armchair. She followed them into the library. This was Silas's sanctuary. Julian was standing by the desk, a massive 19th century oak piece. He was rummaging through the drawers. "Where is it?" Julian hissed. "Where is what?" Evelyn asked. "The blue ledger," Julian snapped. The old man kept a private ledger of his offshore accounts. "I know it exists. I saw it 5 years ago." "I don't know what you're talking about," Evelyn said. "Liar!" Lydia spat, entering the room. "You spent every day with him. Did he give it to you? Did you steal it?" "I didn't steal anything," Evelyn said calmly. Lydia scoffed. She walked over to the fireplace, where a collection of small, hand-whittled wooden birds sat on the mantel. Silas had carved them during his recovery from his first stroke. They were crude, unpolished, and objectively worthless. "Look at this junk," Lydia said. She swept her arm across the mantel. The wooden birds clattered onto the stone hearth. One of them, a small robin, snapped a wing. Evelyn flinched. She knelt down and picked up the broken bird. "Trash it all," Julian commanded the appraisers. "If it's not antique, dumpster it." "Wait," Evelyn said, clutching the broken wooden bird. Can I keep these? And the photo albums in the den?" "They aren't worth anything." Julian laughed, a cold, barking sound. "Oh, feeling sentimental?" "Sure. You can have the trash. Take the old clothes, the half-used toiletries, and this firewood." He gestured to the carvings. "But anything of value stays. Do you hear me? If I find a single silver spoon in your bag, I'll have you arrested for theft." Evelyn nodded slowly. She gathered the wooden birds into her apron pocket. She went to the den and rescued the family photo albums from a discard pile. She went to Silas's bedroom and took his old, moth-eaten cardigan that smelled of pipe tobacco and peppermint. For the next 2 weeks, she lived in the guest cottage at the edge of the property, watching the moving trucks come and go. They took the Renoir painting from the dining room. They took the vintage Rolls-Royce from the garage. They even took the copper pots from the kitchen. Blackwood Manor was being hollowed out, leaving nothing but a shell. The Trinity was celebrating. They were already spending the money they expected to get, booking yachts in the Mediterranean and looking at penthouses in Manhattan. Evelyn said nothing. She sat in the small cottage, gluing the wing back onto the wooden robin. She cleaned the mud off her father's old boots. She waited. Because she knew something they didn't. She knew about the appointment on Thursday, not with the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling, but with Judge Harrison Thorne, the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, and a man who owed Silas Vance a debt that could never be repaid with money. The Trinity thought the will reading was a formality. They were about to find out it was a trap. The offices of Sterling and Associates were located on the 45th floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, offering a panoramic view of the city Silas Vance had helped build. But inside Conference Room B, the atmosphere was suffocating. Evelyn sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. She had her hands folded in her lap, her knuckles white. She was wearing the same black coat from the funeral. Opposite her, the Trinity sat like a panel of judges. Julian was checking stocks on his phone. Lydia was loudly complaining about the quality of the sparkling water provided. Marcus was dozing, sunglasses still on. At 10:10 a.m. sharp, the heavy oak doors opened. Mr. Sterling, the family's longtime attorney, walked in. He was a small, nervous man with thinning hair who had spent 30 years being bullied by Silas Vance, and now by his children. But today, Mr. Sterling wasn't alone. Walking in behind him was a man who sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was tall, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He wore a dark suit, but it was his presence that carried the weight of authority. Julian sat up, sliding his phone into his pocket. "Judge Thorne? What are you doing here?" Harrison Thorne was not just a judge. He was a legend in the New York legal circuit. He was the Chief Justice who had taken down the mob in the 90s. He was also, famously, a recluse who rarely attended social functions, let alone private will readings. Thorne didn't sit. He stood by the window, his back to the view, staring down the siblings. "I am here as the executor of the final protocol, Julian. Your father asked me to ensure that the proceedings today are precise." "Protocol?" Lydia scoffed, flicking a piece of lint off her Chanel dress. "It's a standard will, Harrison. Daddy leaves us the money, we sign the papers and we go. We don't need a chaperone." "We shall see," Thorne said, his voice deep and gravelly. He nodded to Mr. Sterling. "Proceed, Arthur." Mr. Sterling sat down, his hands trembling slightly as he opened a thick leather binder. He didn't look at the siblings. He looked at Evelyn, offering her a fleeting, pitying glance, before clearing his throat. "As you know," Sterling began, "your father updated his will 6 months ago, shortly after his terminal diagnosis." "We know," Marcus yawned. He cut out the charities. Smart man. "This last will and testament," Sterling continued, ignoring him, "is divided into 2 distinct sections. Section A governs the liquidation and distribution of the primary assets, the Vance Corporation shares, the real estate portfolio, and the liquid cash reserves." Julian leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "The total valuation?" $3.2 billion, Sterling said softly. The room went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. $3 billion. It was more than they had estimated. Lydia grabbed Julian's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. A smile, predatory and wide, spread across her face. "However," Sterling said, raising his voice slightly to cut through their greed, "Section A comes with a stipulation. A character clause, if you will." "A what?" Julian snapped. "Your father," Judge Thorne interrupted from the corner, "wanted to give you a choice. You can accept the inheritance laid out in Section A immediately, but once you sign for Section A, you forfeit any claim to what is in Section B." "What's in Section B?" Lydia asked suspiciously. Sterling lifted a sealed red envelope from his briefcase. It was thick, stamped with red wax in the shape of the Vance family crest, a lion holding a key. Section B contains the final inheritance. Its value is undetermined. Julian laughed. Undetermined? That means worthless. He's probably left his collection of old tobacco pipes or his dog's ashes in there. He looked at his siblings. It's a trick. He wants us to hesitate. He wants us to choose the mystery box so we lose the billions. I agree, Marcus said, waking up fully. Give me the billions. Keep the envelope. Sterling looked at Evelyn. Miss Vance? As a beneficiary, you also have a choice. The Trinity turned to look at Evelyn. They had forgotten she was there. She's a beneficiary, Lydia shrieked. Since when? Since always, Sterling said firmly. Evelyn, you may choose to partake in the split of Section A, which would amount to roughly $800 million. Or you may waive your right to the money and accept the sole ownership of Section B, the red envelope. Evelyn looked at the envelope. Then she looked at the faces of her half-siblings. They looked ready to kill her. If she took the money, they would spend the rest of their lives suing her, harassing her, and making her life hell. But that wasn't why she hesitated. She looked at the judge. Thorne gave her the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. I don't want the money, Evelyn said quietly. What? Julian dropped his pen. Are you stupid? I don't want the money, Evelyn repeated, her voice stronger this time. I want Section B. You waive your claim to the $3 billion? Sterling asked formally. I do. Lydia let out a high-pitched, incredulous laugh. Oh my God, she is an idiot. She's actually crazy. More for us. Very well, Sterling said. He slid a stack of documents towards the Trinity. Sign here, here, and here. By signing, you accept the assets of the Vance Empire and legally disown any claim to the contents of the red envelope, regardless of its value. The three of them couldn't sign fast enough. The scratching of expensive fountain pens on paper filled the room. They were practically vibrating with adrenaline. They had won. They had the billions. The help had taken the mystery prize. Done, Julian said, slamming the folder shut. Now let's get out of here. I have a listing agent to call. Sit down. Judge Thorne's voice cracked like a whip. Julian froze. Excuse me? You aren't leaving yet, Thorne said, stepping forward and taking a seat at the head of the table. You've signed for the assets. Now, we must execute Section B. Who cares? Marcus laughed. Open the letter, Evie. Let's see what Daddy left you. A gift card? Sterling handed the red envelope to Evelyn. Her hand shook as she broke the wax seal. She pulled out a single folded piece of parchment and a small rusted iron key. She unfolded the paper. It wasn't a will. It was a letter. Read it aloud, Thorne commanded. Evelyn cleared her throat. The handwriting was shaky, written in the final days of Silas's life, but the tone was unmistakable. To my children, she read. If you are reading this, then the Trinity has chosen the money. I knew you would. You have spent your lives measuring your worth in decimals and commas. You looked at me and saw a bank vault. You looked at this family and saw a corporation. You stripped my house bare before I was even in the ground. I saw the appraisers on the security cameras, Julian. I saw you steal my watch. Julian stiffened, his hand instinctively covering his wrist. The color drained from his face. You think you have won? Evelyn continued reading, tears pricking her eyes. You have the billions, you have the buildings, you have the yachts, but you forgot how I made that money. You forgot that the Vance Empire wasn't built on gold, it was built on dirt. Lydia frowned. What is he rambling about? I leave the billions to Julian, Lydia, and Marcus because money is the only language you speak, and it is the punishment you deserve. It will destroy you. You will eat each other alive for it. But to Evelyn. Evelyn paused. She took a breath. To Evelyn, who sat with me when I could offer nothing but silence, who cleaned my face when I was too weak to lift my arms, who never asked for a dime. To Evelyn, I leave the foundation. The foundation? Marcus asked. Like a charity? Great. She gets a tax write-off. I don't mean a charity, the letter continued. I mean the land, the literal dirt. Check the deed to the Blackwood estate. Check the deeds to the skyscrapers in Manhattan. Check the factory grounds in Detroit. Mr. Sterling stood up. He projected a document onto the smart screen on the wall. It was a complex map of the Vance holdings. What is this? Julian demanded. This, Sterling said, is a separation of assets executed in 1985, which you never bothered to check. Silas Vance separated the improvements, meaning the buildings and the businesses, from the land they sit on. Sterling pointed to the screen. The Trinity has just inherited the Vance Corporation and all physical structures. But the land underneath those structures, the ground Blackwood Manor sits on, the city block under the Vance Tower, the acres under the distribution centers. Sterling turned to Evelyn. That belongs to the holder of the red envelope. The room went deathly silent. Meaning what? Lydia screeched. What does that mean? Judge Thorne leaned forward, a shark-like grin appearing on his face for the first time. It means, the judge said, savoring the words, that your buildings are trespassing on Evelyn's property, and she can charge rent. Rent? Julian laughed nervously. So we pay her a few thousand a month. Who cares? We have billions. I don't think you understand property law, son, Thorne said. Since there is no existing lease agreement, the landowner sets the terms. If you refuse the terms, you have 48 hours to remove your improvements from her land. Remove? Marcus shouted. How the hell do we remove a 60-story skyscraper? That sounds like a you problem, Thorne said. And as for the terms, Sterling added, flipping a page in his binder, Evelyn, your father left a suggested rental schedule in the addendum, should you choose to enforce it. Evelyn looked at the rusted key in her hand. She thought about the yellow stickers. She thought about the wooden bird Lydia had broken. She thought about the way they had treated her mother. What are the terms? Evelyn asked. Sterling adjusted his glasses. For the Vance Tower in Manhattan, the rent is set at $20 million per month. That's insanity, Julian roared, slamming his fist on the table. That bankrupts the operating capital in a year. For Blackwood Manor, Sterling continued, since it is a residence, rent is set at $1 per month. $1, Lydia breathed, relieved. Conditional, Sterling corrected, on the current residents vacating the premises immediately. If they wish to stay, the rent is $500,000 a day. Lydia's jaw dropped. And finally, Sterling said, the rusty key. Evelyn held up the key. This key opened safe deposit box 404 at the First National Bank. Inside is the blue ledger. Julian let out a strangled noise, like a dying animal. He lunged across the table. Give me that key. Judge Thorne stood up, and two large security guards who had been waiting outside the door stepped into the room, blocking Julian. The blue ledger? Evelyn asked. Julian asked me about that. He did, Thorne said, eyeing Julian with disgust. Because the blue ledger contains the records of every illegal transaction, every bribed official, and every tax evasion scheme the Vance Corporation has committed in the last 20 years, mostly under Julian's direction. Thorne turned to Evelyn. Your father kept it as insurance. He never used it because he didn't want to destroy the company while he was alive. But now, it's yours. You own the land they stand on, and you hold the evidence that can send them to prison. Evelyn looked at the Trinity. They weren't smug anymore. They were terrified. Julian was sweating profusely. Lydia was trembling. Marcus looked ready to vomit. They had everything, and they had nothing. "So," Evelyn said, her voice steady, rising above the silence, "I think we need to talk about the yellow stickers." The war for the Vance Empire didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened at the front gate of Blackwood Manor. 3 hours after the will reading, Julian's convoy of SUVs screeched up the long, winding driveway. He was on the phone with the most expensive real estate litigator in New York, a man named Voorhees who was known for shredding contracts. "What do you mean it's ironclad?" Julian screamed, his spit hitting the dashboard. "It's a trick! How can she own the ground under my house? I own the house." "Technically," Voorhees's voice crackled over the speaker, "you own a pile of bricks and timber. She owns the geography. It's a ground lease separation, Julian. It's rare, but your father set it up decades ago. If she tells you to move your bricks, you have to move them, or pay the rent." "I'm not paying her $500,000 a day to sleep in my own bed," Julian roared. He hung up as they reached the main gate, but the gate didn't open. Instead, a heavy-duty chain was wrapped around the wrought-iron bars. Sitting in a folding chair on the other side, calmly reading a paperback book, was a large man with a thick neck and a security uniform. Julian rolled down the window. "Open the gate! Do you know who I am?" The guard didn't look up. "Private property. No trespassing." "I live here!" Julian shouted. "You live in the house," the guard corrected, finally looking up. "But the driveway? That's Miss Vance's property, and she hasn't authorized any vehicular traffic today." Julian turned purple. He threw the car door open and marched up to the gate. "I'm going to run this gate down. I'll drive right through it." The guard pointed a finger to the left. "I wouldn't do that, sir. Miss Vance also owns the bridge over the creek about a mile back. She's currently having it inspected by a demo crew." Julian looked back. The bridge was the only way on or off the estate. They were trapped or locked out. Inside the manor, things were worse. Lydia and Marcus had arrived earlier, before the blockade. Lydia was in the kitchen, frantically trying to turn on the espresso machine. "Why is nothing working?" she shrieked. "The lights are out. The fridge is off." Marcus was sitting on the counter, drinking warm champagne. "The power lines, Lids. They run underground, through her ground. She called the electric company. She revoked the easement rights for the cables." "She can't do that." "She just did." Marcus laughed, though there was no humor in it. "She's besieging us. It's medieval." By nightfall, Blackwood Manor was a tomb. The heating system, which relied on an external oil tank, located naturally on Evelyn's land, had been disconnected. The temperature in the house began to drop. Julian, Lydia, and Marcus gathered in the drawing room, wrapped in the fur coats they had planned to wear to the opera. They huddled around a single candle. The irony was suffocating. They were surrounded by millions of dollars worth of art and furniture, yet they were freezing and hungry. "We have to negotiate," Marcus chattered, his teeth clicking. "I can't do this. I have a spa appointment tomorrow." "No!" Julian snapped. "That's what she wants. She wants us to come crawling. We have the billions, remember? We have the Vance Corporation." His phone buzzed. It was a text from the CFO of the company. Urgent. "Julian, we just received a cease and desist for the Vance Tower. The landowner is demanding 20 million as rent by midnight, or she's locking the lobby doors. The board is panicking. The stock dropped 12% in after-hours trading." Julian threw his phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. "She's choking us," Julian whispered. "She's actually doing it." "What about the ledger?" Lydia asked, her voice small. "Does she really have it?" Julian looked into the dying flame of the candle. If she opens that box, if she gives that book to the DOJ, the money won't matter. I'll go to federal prison for 20 years, and you two will be accessories." Lydia began to cry. "I don't want to go to prison. I just wanted the Hamptons house." "We have to get that key," Julian said, his eyes hardening. "We don't negotiate. We take it." "How?" Marcus asked. "She's in the guest cottage. It's guarded." "She's alone," Julian said. "She's always been alone. She thinks she's strong, but she's just the help. She'll break if we push hard enough." He stood up, grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. "Where are you going?" Lydia asked. "I'm going to pay our little sister a visit," Julian said. "And I'm getting that key." The sun went down, but the lights at Blackwood Manor did not come on. By 8 p.m., the sprawling Georgian estate was no longer a symbol of dynastic wealth. It was a limestone tomb encased in freezing rain. The siege of Blackwood, as the tabloids would later call it, had officially begun, and inside the belly of the beast, the Vance Trinity, was unraveling with terrifying speed. Julian paced the length of the obsidian-tiled kitchen, his Italian leather loafers clicking frantically against the floor. The room was pitch black, save for the flashlight beam from his iPhone, which cast jagged, dancing shadows against the sub-zero refrigerators. "This is illegal," Julian hissed, his breath pluming in the cold air. "She cannot simply turn off the power. There are laws, damn it. Tenant rights." "We aren't tenants, Julian," Marcus mumbled from the corner. He was sitting on the floor, wrapped in a mink coat he had pulled from his mother's old closet, one of the few items they hadn't stickered for sale yet. He was shivering violently. "We're squatters. Sterling sent the email an hour ago. Since we refused the ground lease terms, we are technically trespassing on her land. She has the right to disconnect utilities to non-compliant structures." "Shut up!" Julian roared, kicking a cabinet. "Don't quote the law to me. I am the law in this state." "Not anymore." Lydia's voice drifted in from the pantry. She emerged, looking like a ghost. Her mascara had run down her cheeks, and she was clutching a box of artisan crackers, the only food they could eat without cooking. "I tried to order Uber Eats. The driver cancelled. He said security at the main gate turned him away. They told him the driveway was closed for private maintenance." Lydia let out a hysterical, high-pitched giggle that bounced off the cold walls. "She's starving us out. The little mouse is starving us out." The temperature in the house continued to plummet. The Vance estate was equipped with a state-of-the-art smart heating system, but the oil tanks were located 300 yards away, behind the guest cottage, on Evelyn's land. She had simply turned a valve. The irony was suffocating. They were surrounded by approximately $4 million worth of assets. There were Rembrandts on the walls, Ming vases on the pedestals, and Persian rugs on the floors. But none of it could produce heat. None of it could produce light. The yellow stickers they had slapped on every object seemed to glow in the gloom, mocking them. "Value $15,000, said the sticker on the antique sideboard. But right now, it was just a piece of wood they couldn't burn. "We have to burn the furniture," Julian said suddenly, a crazed look in his eyes. "What?" Marcus looked up. "The fireplace in the library," Julian stammered, his teeth chattering. "We need wood. We threw out the actual firewood because it was clutter, remember? So we burn the chairs. We burn the books." "You want to burn the first editions?" Lydia asked, horrified. The Sotheby's appraiser valued the library collection at $2 million. "I don't care what it's worth," Julian screamed, his voice cracking. "I can't feel my fingers." He lunged for a heavy 18th century dining chair, dragging it across the floor. The sound of expensive wood scraping against stone was like a scream. While the manor descended into chaos, the guest cottage, situated 200 yards down the hill, was a beacon of warmth. Evelyn sat by the window, watching the darkened silhouette of the big house. The rain lashed against the glass, but inside, her small world was golden. The fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth. The smell of steeping Earl Grey tea and toasted bread filled the air. She felt no joy in this. She wasn't a sadist, but she remembered the last 3 years vividly. She remembered the time Julian had cut the budget for her mother's hospice care, forcing Evelyn to nurse her alone in this very cottage. She remembered Lydia laughing when Evelyn asked for help with the funeral costs. She remembered Marcus calling her a leech because she lived on the property, even though she spent every waking hour caring for their dying father. They had tried to freeze her out of the family for a decade. She was simply returning the favor for one night. Her phone buzzed on the side table. It was Judge Thorne. "Status?" the text read. Evelyn typed back. "The lights are out. The gate is locked. I'm waiting." "Be careful," Thorne replied. "A rat is most dangerous when it's cornered. Remember the leverage. Do not waver." Evelyn set the phone down. She touched the pocket of her cardigan, feeling the cold, rusted iron key. The key to box 404. She didn't have to wait long. At 10:15 p.m., the heavy oak doors of the manor banged open. Through the rain-slicked window, she saw 3 figures stumbling down the hill. They looked pathetic, struggling against the wind, slipping in the mud, their expensive clothes soaked instantly. Julian was in the lead. He wasn't walking with the stride of a CEO anymore. He was marching with the desperate, jagged energy of a man whose life was collapsing. He was carrying something long and metallic in his right hand. Evelyn stood up. She walked to the kitchenette and turned off the kettle. She didn't lock the door. She wanted them to come in. The door to the cottage didn't just open, it exploded inward. Julian kicked it with such force that the wood splintered around the lock. He stormed into the room, bringing the storm with him. Rainwater pooled instantly on the hardwood floor. Lydia and Marcus followed, shivering, their faces pale and streaked with mud. "You witch!" Julian roared. He raised the object in his hand, a heavy, wrought-iron fire poker. "Turn it back on! Turn the power back on right now!" Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood by the armchair, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She looked at Julian, then at the weapon, then back at his eyes. "Hello, Julian," she said, her voice calm, barely above a whisper. "You're dripping on my floor." "I'm going to kill you," Julian seethed, stepping closer. The veins in his neck were bulging. "You think you can steal my company? You think you can hijack my house? I will beat the life out of you before I let you take a single dime." "Julian, stop!" Lydia screamed, grabbing his arm. "He'll do it, Evie. He's lost his mind. Just give him the key." Evelyn looked at Lydia. "Is that what you think this is about? The key? Give it to me!" Julian shouted, shaking Lydia off. He swung the poker, smashing a porcelain lamp on the side table. The crash was deafening in the small room. Shards of pottery flew across the rug. "The deposit box key. I know you have it. Give it to me, and maybe I won't burn this cottage down with you inside it." Evelyn slowly reached into her pocket. Julian's eyes widened, greedy and wild. She pulled out her hand, empty. "Go ahead," Evelyn said. "Hit me. Kill me. Burn the cottage." Julian froze, confused by her lack of fear. "Do it," Evelyn challenged, her voice hardening into steel. "Add murder in the first degree to the list. It will make a nice epilogue to the Blue Ledger." "You're bluffing," Julian spat. "You don't know what's in that ledger. Dad never showed you. It's a myth." "Is it?" Evelyn took a step forward, invading Julian's personal space. "Shall I quote page 42? The consulting fees paid to Senator Reynolds in 2018 to rezone the wetlands for the chemical plant. $500,000, wired through a shell company in the Caymans. Julian's face went slack. The color drained from his skin so fast he looked like a corpse. Or page 100, Evelyn continued, her eyes boring into his. The structural safety reports for the Vance Tower, the ones you buried, the ones that said the steel wasn't high-grade enough for wind loads. You saved $12 million, Julian, and you put thousands of lives at risk. Dad found out about that 3 days before his stroke. That's what killed him. The stress of knowing his son was a monster. The fireplace poker slipped from Julian's hand. It hit the floor with a heavy, dull thud. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. He knew, Julian whispered, his voice trembling. He knew about the steel. He knew everything, Evelyn said. He spent the last 6 months of his life trying to fix your messes without destroying the family name. He created the red envelope not to punish you, but to stop you. He knew if you got the full inheritance, you'd eventually destroy the company and end up in prison. He wanted to force you to stop. Marcus sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. It's over. If the DOJ sees that ledger, we're done. Federal prison for decades. I didn't know about the steel, Lydia sobbed, collapsing next to Marcus. I just signed the papers Julian gave me. I just wanted the dividends. Ignorance is not a defense, Lydia, Evelyn said coldly. You sat on the board. You took the money. You are complicit. Julian looked around the room, dazed. The rage had evaporated, replaced by a crushing, nauseating fear. He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, for the first time in years. He didn't see the mousy half-sister anymore. He saw Silas Vance's eyes staring back at him, unyielding, moral, final. He fell to his knees. The mighty Julian Vance, who had terrorized boardrooms and bullied waitstaff, knelt on the wet floor of the guest cottage. Please, he croaked, tears mixing with the rain on his face. Please, Evie, don't open the box. I'll do anything. I'll give you the money. I'll give you the billions. Just don't send me to prison. I can't survive prison. Evelyn looked down at him. A surge of pity rose in her chest, but she tamped it down. Pity had allowed them to walk all over her for years. This required justice. I don't want your money, Julian, she said. I told you that in the courtroom. Then what? Julian begged, grasping at the hem of her cardigan. Name your price. Anything. Evelyn stepped back, pulling her sweater from his grip. She walked to the small kitchenette table and picked up the rusted iron key. She held it up in the firelight. I have 3 conditions, she said. Non-negotiable. Anything, Marcus said from the couch. Yes, we agree. First, Evelyn said, the yellow stickers. Lydia looked up, confused. The stickers? Every single neon yellow price tag you placed on our father's memories, Evelyn said, her voice shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. You will go back into that house, and you will remove them. Every single one. You will not use the staff. You will not use the movers. You will do it with your own fingernails. If I find a single sticker on a book, or a chair, or a picture frame, I open the box. Done, Julian gasped. We'll do it right now. Second, Evelyn continued, you will resign. All 3 of you. Effective tomorrow morning. You will sign over voting control of the Vance Corporation to the interim CEO that Judge Thorne has selected. But, Julian started to protest, but Evelyn raised the key. Fine, fine. We resign. And third, Evelyn said, looking toward the window where the dark manor loomed. You leave Blackwood. Leave? Lydia whispered. Tonight, Evelyn said. Once the stickers are gone, you pack your personal bags and you go. This estate is not an asset to be liquidated. It is my home, and you have treated it like a carcass." "Where will we go?" Marcus asked. "You have $3 billion in cash," Evelyn said, her voice icy. "I suggest you buy a conscience, but until then, a hotel will have to do." She walked over to the door and pulled it open. The wind howled, blowing rain into the warm room. "The power will come back on in 10 minutes, Evelyn said. "That should give you enough light to find the stickers. Get out." Julian stood up slowly. He looked at the poker on the floor, then at Evelyn. He looked smaller, shrunken inside his wet suit. He nodded once, a jerky, broken movement. He walked out into the rain. Lydia and Marcus followed, heads bowed, defeated not by a legal loophole, but by the sheer weight of their own sins. Evelyn watched them trudge back up the hill. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt exhausted. She closed the door, engaged the deadbolt, and leaned her forehead against the wood. She reached into her pocket and took out her phone. She texted Judge Thorne. "They agreed. It's done." She walked back to the fire and sat down. For the first time in 3 years, the house on the hill didn't feel like a threat. It felt like it was waiting for her. The siege was over. The restoration was about to begin. The sun that rose over Blackwood Manor the next morning was blindingly bright, cutting through the storm clouds that had choked the sky for days. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles, a clean, sharp scent that signaled a new beginning. Evelyn stood on the front porch, wrapped in her father's old cardigan. The driveway was empty. The blockade was gone. The bridge was open. At 4 a.m., a procession of luxury cars had departed the estate. There were no paparazzi, no fanfare. Just 3 defeated heirs fleeing the kingdom they had tried to conquer. Julian had looked aged 10 years in a single night. Lydia hadn't even looked back. Marcus had given Evelyn a small, awkward wave, a gesture of surrender. Inside, the house was silent. But it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a deep breath. Evelyn walked through the foyer. The grandfather clock ticked rhythmically. The neon yellow sticker that had marred its glass face was gone. She walked into the dining room. The table was bare, but the sticker that had been slapped onto the mahogany surface had been peeled away. She went to the library. The desk was clear. The discard piles had been returned to the shelves. The Trinity had spent the entire night under the watchful eye of the security guard, undoing their greed. They had peeled off every single price tag. They had put back the books. They had effectively erased themselves from the house. Evelyn sat down in Silas's leather chair. It creaked, a familiar, comforting sound. There was a knock at the library door. "May I come in?" It was Judge Harrison Thorne. He was dressed in a tweed suit today, looking less like an executioner and more like an old friend. He carried a small wooden box. "They resigned," Thorne said, placing a file on the desk. "The press release goes out at noon. Personal reasons. Julian is moving to Europe. The board has appointed an interim CEO. Someone your father trusted." "Good," Evelyn said softly. "And the ledger?" "Safe." Thorne tapped the side of his head. "And the key is yours. As long as they behave, the box stays closed. It's a leash, Evelyn, and you hold the handle." Evelyn looked around the massive room. "I didn't do it for the power, Harrison. I couldn't let them erase him. They were treating his life like a garage sale." "I know," Thorne smiled. He pushed the small wooden box toward her. "Your father knew that too. That's why he gave you the land. He knew you were the only one who understood that a house isn't just assets. It's roots." Evelyn opened the wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was not a jewel or a check. It was the wooden robin, the one Lydia had broken. It had been repaired, The glue line on the wing was visible, but it was strong. Next to it was a note, written in Silas's hand. "Evie, if you are reading this, then the house is yours. I'm sorry for the war I left you to fight. I had to know if you were strong enough to hold the weight of this family. The broken bird flies the strongest because it knows the value of the wind. You were never the help, my dear. You were the hope." Dad. Tears finally spilled over Evelyn's cheeks. Not tears of grief, but of release. For years she had been the invisible daughter, the quiet observer, the one who took the insults and the orders. She stood up and walked to the window. She looked out over the sprawling lawns of the Blackwood estate. She owned the grass. She owned the trees. She owned the dirt. But more importantly, she owned her voice. She wasn't just Evelyn Vance, the half-sister. She was the keeper of the foundation. "What will you do now?" Thorne asked, watching her. "You have the rental income from the skyscrapers. You have the estate. You have enough money to never lift a finger again." Evelyn wiped her eyes and turned back to him. A small, determined smile played on her lips. "First," she said, picking up the wooden robin and placing it back on the mantel, right where it belonged. "I'm going to fix the garden. The roses have been neglected for years." She looked at the judge. "And then, I'm going to make sure the Vance Corporation starts building things that actually help people." The Trinity looked at the dirt and saw dollar signs. "I look at it and see room to grow." The judge nodded, satisfied. He tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Vance." "Good day, Harrison." As the front door clicked shut, Evelyn walked over to the piano, the Steinway she had learned to play on. She sat down on the bench. She lifted the cover. For the first time in 3 years, she played. The music filled the empty halls of Blackwood Manor, chasing away the shadows, filling the void where the greed used to be. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was a home. And finally, after all the noise, the silence was beautiful. And that is how Evelyn Vance went from the invisible daughter to the most powerful woman in the Vance Empire, all without raising her voice until the moment it mattered most. This story reminds us of a brutal truth. Arrogant people often mistake silence for weakness. The Trinity thought that because Evelyn was quiet, she was defenseless. They thought that because they had the expensive suits and the loud demands, they had the power. But they forgot that a skyscraper creates a shadow, but the foundation holds it up. Silas Vance left his children exactly what they deserved. The greedy got the money that would eventually isolate them, and the faithful daughter got the roots that would ground her. It's a lesson in patience, strategy, and the ultimate victory of character over cash. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more stories about karmic justice and family secrets, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you were Evelyn? Would you have forgiven the siblings? Or would you have opened the blue ledger and sent them to jail? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.